at the Carnegie Endowment in Washington, D.C. It's a real privilege today to host Sweden's foreign minister, Ann Linde, who has been the foreign minister of Sweden since 2019, and has really been at the forefront of the global conversation on any number of issues, whether it's the crisis in relations with Russia, the need to promote greater gender equality on the world stage, humanitarian issues. But it's a real privilege to welcome Minister Linde, who is also now, as of the beginning of this month, operating as the chairperson in office of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE. And in that capacity, she's heading to Moscow on Monday. It couldn't be a more timely visit. We're really grateful to host her today in conjunction with Carnegie's program on Europe, which is led by Eric Bratberg. And Carnegie has a long history of focusing on OSCE issues. One of our colleagues, Dan Baer is the former U.S. ambassador to the OSCE. Philip Remler was the head of an OSCE mission in Moldova for many years. So we've really focused on these issues for quite some time, and we're honored to welcome the minister today. It's so great to see you. Can you give us maybe just a quick overview of Sweden's priorities and how you see the next phase of your role as chairperson office unfolding?
Well, thank you, Andrew, and it's a great pleasure for me to participate in this event 4 weeks into the chairpersonship of the OSCE and the weeks since the inauguration of President Biden. So I appreciate the opportunity to share my perspective on the European security at this very critical time. Let me just, on a bilateral note, say that Sweden's cooperation with the United States is and has always been broad, deep, and highly valued. Actually, this morning, I was making a presentation for all my colleagues in the cabinet about our future relation with the new administration. And I would say that nearly all of the 23 ministers took the floor. So there is a great interest. Then we spend the rest of the time speaking about Corona, as on every cabinet meeting this time. We have an excellent foundation to develop our bilateral and close relationship. So I hope that we will be able to work more in tandem on multilateral issues. That is peace and security, especially in our neighborhood. The EU has outlined a number of areas where we look forward to working with this administration. We started the dialogue on one theme, climate, last Friday, with an excellent conversation with the President's climate envoy, John Kerry. Actually, we continued for double as long time as we had planned for. President Biden's speech at the inauguration signaled the importance of unity and democracy. And as a longtime friend of the US, I listened with hope after having been so shocked by the attack on the Capitolium in January the 6th. We look forward to working together with the US administration in the spirit of cooperation that the president has made a priority. The role as chair of the OSCE comes with both opportunities and challenges. Opportunities in that there is a need for the OSCE and its toolbox today. Challenges because of the serious situation in our neighborhood. It has deteriorated. And the norms and commitments which we have all signed up to have been undermined. I am determined to do our part to improve that picture. We welcome the strong signals from Biden administration to engage actively in the multilateral cooperation. American leadership on this issue are hugely important. And looking at the OSCE, I would say it's a perfect forum for the OS to engage in. Transatlantic, firmly based on the European security order, one of the few organizations which allow for confidence building and cooperation between US, Russia, and Europe. As was rightly pointed out in the invitation to this event, there are a number of serious conflicts and crises in the OSCE region. Some of them were on the agenda already when Sweden last held the chair, and that is 28 years ago, while others has occurred more recently. Although finding a long-term solution to the conflicts and crises is difficult, the OSCE is uniquely placed to support these efforts through the joint commitments to peace and security that all participating states have agreed on. It is these commitments on which the European security is built, and it is they, based on the international law and the Charter of the United Nations, which underpins the European security order. This is essential for the security in our region. This is why we have decided that our first priority as chair is to defend these commitments and the structure that we have built. The important role of the OSCE play is also visible in the different conflict resolution and the different formats that exists. Last year's outbreak of an armed conflict in and around Nagorno-Karabakh, its heavy death toll on human suffering, made abundantly clear the risks inherent when conflict remain unsolved. In this case, the OSCE has a vital role to play in conflict settlement, including on the ground. Last week, I visited Ukraine for discussion with President Zelensky and Foreign Minister Kuleba. I also had the opportunity to visit the contact line and experience firsthand the suffering that the conflict causes for the civilian population. I hope that the two new entry-exit checkpoints in Solot, where I visited, and Shastia, can soon be opened, and the new demining and disengagement zone can soon be defined, as there are concrete measures that would ease the situation markedly for the civilians. The important work that the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission, SMM, is doing also deserves our full praise. During my visit to Moscow next week, I expect fruitful and frank discussion with Foreign Minister Lavrov regarding a number of issues on the OSCE agenda. Since resolution of the protracted conflict in the OSCE is a key priority for us, and Russia has a significant role in all of these conflicts, I wanted to make this trip early on as chair. As CIO, I will also prioritize to upholding the OSCE concept of comprehensive security. We know that states that implement human rights commitments and respect democratic principles are more secure and able to provide better economic prospects and living conditions for their citizens. The OSCE has a unique instrument to support participating states in living up to our commitments. The autonomous institution, that's ODIHR, the representative of free media and the high representative for national minorities, each have a very clear, very strong mandate. And our work as chair will be to carry out in support of them and complementary to them so that they can do their work. The way that civil society is included in the OSCE and invited to OSCE meetings is a model for others to follow. Together, we have also declared all OSCE principles and commitments to be matter of immediate and legitimate control to all participating states. By holding each other accountable, we make sure that our commitments remain relevant. By honoring our commitments, we make sure that the region is safe. It was against this background that I, together with the previous CIO, Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama, offered the OSCE's good offices to facilitate a genuine dialogue between the government and opposition in Belarus. It is also why we are following with concern the development in Russia after the arrest of Navalny and the protests that took place there past weekend. I also want to mention the confidence and security building measures that contribute to transparency and predictability between military forces in Europe. Although in the need of updates and improved compliance, The Vienna document and the Open Sky Treaty both play a vital role to reduce tension and foster cooperation. I'm very concerned that the Open Sky Treaty is severely challenged. The lack of compliance with the Open Sky Treaty by Russia contributed to the US deciding to leave the treaty last year. It is very worrying that Russia has now threatened to follow the way of US. As Swedish foreign minister and CIO of OSCE, I support all efforts to ensure that these instruments can continue to fulfill their vital functions and ideally be modernized where appropriate. In this context, I also, of course, welcome that President Biden is seeking an extension of the START agreement with Russia as a signal that arms control plays an important function to reduce tension and strengthen security in Europe. It's also, of course, important that Tony Blinken said yesterday that they will seek to find a way to join the JCPOA again. Before concluding, I would like to mention that the Swedish feminist foreign policy, which permits all aspects to our international engagement, including, of course, the chairpersonship of OSCE. The meaningful inclusion of women in conflict resolution efforts strengthen the prospect of sustainable peace. The agenda for women, peace and security will therefore be an important priority of our term as chair. It is with this in mind that I welcome the important signal that Vice President Harris sends to all girls and boys, women and men, that the glass ceiling can be removed. Only when all members of the population are included can true comprehensive security be achieved. Sweden stands ready to work with the new administration to advance democracy, human rights and gender equality, all in support of the shared security of all participating states in the OSCE. So if I were to summarize a message here, it would be engage. It will make a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. That's really a very powerful overview. Let me try to begin a bit of a lightning round of questions. I know our time's limited. And then hopefully I will be bringing in people from YouTube who are watching us. So you can use the YouTube chat function. You can also email europe@ceip.org, or you can tweet us using @CarnegieEndow with the hashtag AskCarnegie. So anyone who's watching now can join the conversation as well. Let's talk about Moscow for a second. When the Helsinki Final Act was signed in 1975, which laid the groundwork for the OSCE's formation, there was clearly a tension between the focus on domestic political rights and the relationship between states. And this idea that comprehensive security connects the two of them was fiercely resisted by the Soviets. And even though the creation of the Helsinki Final Act was a huge inspiration to the dissident movement in the Soviet Union and energized their work and provided some international legitimacy, the Soviets were never comfortable with this. And they always wanted to focus on the hard security aspects, the inviolability of borders, rules to prevent states from operating militarily without transparency, those kinds of things. So you're going into the belly of the beast next week, and the Russians have not shown themselves to be good friends of either the principles of the Helsinki Final Act or the OSCE as an institution. And they've done a lot to chip away at both. So I'm just curious, what are the tools that people who believe in these principles actually can utilize right now that can make a difference? As you were saying at the end, engagement makes a difference. But without leverage and without tools, I'm not really sure how much engagement's actually going to change the situation.
Well, thank you. Yes, of course, that is one of the issues that we have been dealing with already since the end of the Cold War. And that's why it's so important that we actually agreed on the European security order, and not least the concept of comprehensive security, meaning that it's not only military means, but also democracy, human rights, and rule of law that is within this comprehensive concept. And that is something that all the participating state has signed up to, meaning that there is in Vienna every single week the Permanent Council with the issue of accountability. So every single week, each ambassador from each country brings up issues that they think has been a violation of the European security order or the concept of comprehensive security. And then each state has to defend why one has done as one has the actions or anything like that. And I'm sure that it has it has an influence on how countries are behaving. On the same time, we see that there are breaches and very clear breaches of the European security order. For example, when it comes to the conflict in and around Ukraine, and when it comes to what has happened in Georgia, and so on and so forth. So, but we should see, if we didn't have this weekly issue of discussion, accountability, where would we be then? I think we would be in a much worse situation. And I will be very clear when I go to Moscow, as I've been every time I speak with the Russian foreign minister, both where we can find ways to cooperate. For example, we have a very good cooperation when it comes to Arctic issues. Here we talk about climate, about low tension, about the people living there, indigenous people, and having research projects together. As well as being clear on where we think there has been violations on the European security order or other issues. So I think that the situation we are in with OSCE engagement is better than if we haven't had it. Saying not that everything is perfect, far from it.
So I understand that on Sunday in Moscow, we're expecting another round of demonstrations. And the demonstrations last weekend were quite significant, occurring in over 100 cities across Russia in the middle of a pandemic. And people seem to be now, in the wake of those demonstrations, facing serious pressure from the authorities. People are being held in detention or facing another round of show trials, penalizing them for basically exercising rights to free expression and trying to make their voices heard. Something that's really at the heart of what we in modern societies think is a basic human right. If you took off your OSCE hat for a moment and you put on your Swedish national hat or your European hat, what is the way, you'll be there on Monday, the day after these demonstrations, which are going to be held in front of the old headquarters of the KGB and the what we call the Kremlin, the presidential administration. That's where the demonstrations are supposedly planned to be held on Sunday. What's the right Western response to these demonstrations? How do Western governments strike the right balance between embracing our values and supporting brave Russian citizens in what they're doing without falling into the old trap, which is that these people are the stooges or the tools of the West, which is already what we're hearing from the Russian leadership? How do we strike that balance? And what do you plan to do on Monday to help stabilize the situation?
Well, of course, I'm deeply concerned by what's happening, both the poisoning of Navalny and the arrest of Navalny. And also, of course, the authorities' detention of thousands of people and the use of violence against peaceful protesters that happened last weekend. And that, of course, is showing a negative pattern for the democratic space, which is shrinking in Russia. That is also the laws when it comes to so-called foreign agents, making it more difficult for other countries and other NGOs to support NGOs and civil society in Russia. And we discussed this issue when the foreign minister of European Union met in Brussels on Monday. And we had a very unified view on the concern we had, as I just described. And there is also already sanctions because of the poisoning of Navalny. And we think this must be, of course, be investigated. And at this stage, we don't rule out any additional measures. If I put on my CEO hat, I'm also following this development closely, because all OSCE participating state has agreed that security cannot be achieved without respect for human rights and democracy and functioning democratic institutions and the possibility for people to use their freedom of speech. That's also why we have, for example, ODIHR or the media representative. And I think that there has been decisions in OSCE. For example, in 2010 in Astana, there was a reaffirmation of the commitments that were made in the so-called human dimension that all issues in the human dimension, which is human rights and democracy, freedom of speech, all these things, are direct and legitimate concern of all the participating states, and do not exclusively belongs to internal affairs of the state concerned. And I think that is very important that was reaffirmed just roughly 10 years ago.
Thank you for that. So continuing on the regional landscape that you surveyed in your opening presentation, it's terrific news that the Biden administration is already signaling that they are going to prioritize the Ukraine conflict and that this issue will no longer be thrown under the bus as it was in the Trump era. But we are in a very different place, unfortunately, than we were just 4 years ago when then Vice President Biden was the US point person on the conflict. We see a much deeper stalemate. We see faltering reform efforts under President Zelensky. So a lot of questions about the direction that he's planning to take the country in terms of building stronger democratic institutions, rooting out high-level corruption. There's just a lot more of an inheritance, a bad inheritance after the past 4 years. But I'm curious, what do you see as the path forward for trying to bring about a lasting political settlement in Donbass? There have been talks in the past months of abandoning the Minsk framework and, possible plan B that would somehow basically have the Ukrainian authorities pass the parcel over to Russia and say, you broke it, you own it. There's a lack of US participation over the last 4 years in the high-level diplomatic efforts led by France and Germany. There's a lot of pieces of this that need to come together. I'm both in your CIO hat, but also in your European hat. Can you talk a little bit about your prescription for bringing about a better situation for the people of Ukraine who've suffered so much?
Yes, the first thing is to keep it on the agenda. That's the first thing. Not to let it slip away. Even if it's since 2014, it should still be a priority. And I also wanted to make it clear by making it my first visit as CIO. And then, of course, the crisis in and around Ukraine remains to be a challenge to the European security order. And we would like to contribute to the ongoing negotiations. We have different formats, some where the OSCE is participating, somewhere we are not. We had an N4 format, and that's, of course, France and Germany and Russia and Ukraine. And then we have also the trilateral contact group, where OSCE and the special representative, her name is Heidi Grau, is taking part. And they meet regularly, at least several times a month, to discuss how to come forward. And one thing that is positive now is that they agreed on a ceasefire the 27th of July, and it's still, they still keep it, the partner to keep the ceasefire. And when I visited both the conflict line and Ukraine last year, I visited the first week of March, and already then, only in that part of the conflict line where I did was 34 casualties. And all in all, there has been 14,000 deaths in this conflict. And I think sometimes it's like we don't understand how big it actually has been when it comes to people being killed in the conflict. And now, after 27th of July, the number of people who has been killed in the conflict has gone down dramatically. And that is, of course, good, and the humanitarian situation is much better. But it's not a sustainable peace, of course. But you have to put in the humanitarian aspects also, and not only geopolitical aspects. I have met with those women who live there. I have seen those pensioners who have to go over the bridge for nearly kilometers just to pick up their pensions. So I have seen and talked to people who has been caught in the middle with part of the family on one side and the other part on the other side. And we cannot forget also the humanitarian dimension. I would like also to bring up the special monitoring mission, SMM, which I, of course, have met several times, and I have been spoken to the chief, the leader, Ambassador Shevik from Turkey, and we need to insist of full possibility for them to go through the whole conflict line to the whole area in Ukraine, and that they have the mobility and that it's not restricted. And even if sometimes it has been used, the pandemic, as a reason, that is one of those things that we need to really be vigilant about. So the SMM is the biggest field mission that OSCE has, and it's doing a really, really important and good work. I was myself visiting now one of the technical installation in Kyiv, where you have cameras on every exit entry point on parts of the whole conflict line. They follow it 24/7, so they can absolutely immediately see if there is any incidents.
So I feel in some ways reminded of this example of how once the leaders of the Taliban sent a message to the US ambassador in Kabul where they said, you have all the watches and we have the time. And so as we go through this list of stalemate situations, I do worry that the stalemates favor the advocates of violence and the opponents of the Helsinki principles. So maybe if I can turn to the next stalemate issue, which is Belarus, where beginning in August, we saw the people of Belarus both speaking out on behalf of the need to have their voices respected after a fraudulent election, and then they have suffered immensely in the face of brutality and violence by the Belarusian authorities. In the past 6 months, that protest movement has been facing a similar brick wall and stalemate, where the authorities are basically trying to wait them out and pull the political air out of the balloon. There's a process that was supposed to be launched by President Lukashenko involving rewriting the constitution, and then some, possible opening there to lead to a political transition, but a lot of big questions about how sincere that effort is and what the ultimate end game is. But I'm just curious, part of the problem in this region, the post-Soviet region, has been that the actors, the local key players, basically turn to the OSCE and say, "You didn't fix this. It's you've been unable to fix this crisis," and then they just kind of basically wave away OSCE involvement. I'm curious, what kind of role do you think the OSCE can play in Belarus? Could it be a platform, for example, for these discussions on a new constitution, which would be a very tangible and practical way, a platform that the parties could use in a sort of comfortable area for discussion, as opposed to what the Belarusian and the Russian authorities are resisting, which is foreign mediation, right? Can the OSCE provide a platform that parties to conflicts can avail themselves of in the Belarus example?
Well, thank you for bringing up Belarus. I've been engaged in Belarus for more than 20 years. I used to be international secretary in my political party, the Social Democrats, and we started campaign for democracy and freedom of speech in Belarus already in the year 2000. And I was there the first time in 2004. And I've kept many contacts because it has been a pain to have an authoritarian regime in the midst of Europe and so close to Sweden. I mean, it's only 500 kilometers from Stockholm, a little longer, but at least from the border. And it's I have in the beginning of the conflict, I had contact with the foreign minister, McKay, and I have contacts several times with all the leaders in the opposition. For example, Mrs. Tikhanovskaya and Kovakova and Tseplapov and Latushka and so on and so forth. And what we can do from OSCE and what we have done is to offer the good office of OSCE to facilitate a dialogue because that is needed. And you should be aware when you analyze the situation, because it's different in the different countries. In Belarus, it's not an issue of being anti-Russian or pro-EU. It has nothing to do with that. It's very different from, for example, what happened in Ukraine. And the opposition has been very, very clear on they don't want us to use this as an anti-Russian issue. They want to have this as democracy in Belarus issue. They want their freedom. They want to choose their own leader. They want to have democracy. And that has to start with a dialogue with the regime. And that also what the offer from the OSCE is on the table. And of course, we have the discussions with the opposition, and they still want it to be on the table. The regime has not been interested so far, but of course, I hope that it will be possible.
So thank you for that. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I hope to turn things over to the people who are watching. So again, if you want to pose a question to Minister Linda, please use the chat function in YouTube. You can tweet at us. You can also send an email to europe@ceip.org. On Nagorno-Karabakh, where, as you mentioned in your opening presentation, we had a very dramatic worsening of the conflict at the end of last year with significant loss of life, and then a dramatic change both in the situation on the ground as well as the geopolitics of the region, with the reinsertion of a Russian peacekeeping mission, the very visible role that Turkey played in supporting the Azeri military offensive. I'm curious, as my colleagues who've worked on this region, where Carnegie is quite active, have pointed out, there is, now for the first time since the Soviet period, what Russians have long wanted, which is a significant military operation along the line of contact. The OSCE civilian-led effort is not, to my understanding, I may be wrong about this, in place. So there's no sort of international presence alongside the Russians. And then you've also lost, as my colleague, a new Carnegie colleague, Anna Ahanyan, has been pointing out, you've lost the input of women and civil society groups in the reconciliation process and the stabilization efforts. So I'm sort of curious, if putting back your CIO hat, how you might both elevate the role of the international community in this conflict, as well as bring in greater participation by women in civil society in providing for a longer term, more stable situation.
Well, thank you. Yes, I have been in contact with my counterpart, both in Azerbaijan and Armenia, a couple of times. And of course, I welcome that there is a ceasefire after the conflict broke out to be heated again. I mean, nearly 3,000 people lost their life. Again, we shouldn't neglect the unacceptable attacks on civilians and many who has had to leave their homes, wounded, and still the humanitarian situation remains deeply worrying. And it's essential now that both sides comply with the obligation under the international humanitarian law when it comes to end the suffering, and for example, when it comes to bodies and giving back people who have been killed to where they belong, and so on and so forth. We have just given ICRC $2.5 million extra from the Swedish side to help them with this very, very difficult task. It's important that OSCE and the international community remain engaged in this conflict, even if there was the ceasefire was broken between Azerbaijan and Armenia and Russia and Turkey. It shouldn't be a situation where OSCE is not being seen as an important player, because we still have the Minsk group with the chairpersons. It's the co-chairs is Russia, United States, and France. I have met both them, and I have given renewed mandate to my personal representative, special representative, Ambassador Kasperczyk from Poland, to continue to see what will be the role of the OSCE to get a sustainable peace accord, because there is none. There is a ceasefire, but there is not a sustainable peace accord. And here we are discussing different ways forward and what role OSCE can play. And there are different proposals. There are still not any agreement. And I also, of course, I went to Ankara to speak with my counterpart, Mr. Çavuşoğlu. And we had a long discussion, of course, on Nagorno-Karabakh, and that would also be an important topic when I meet my counterpart, Minister Lavrov, in Moscow, because nobody wants to see another outbreak militarily that when it leads to so many killings and casualties.
Thank you, Minister Linda. So I'm going to relay a couple questions. I'm conscious that our time is limited, but these are questions that have come in from people watching this via YouTube. One of them comes from the former head of the OSCE mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And Robert is curious if you could outline your priorities on the turbulent Balkan region, both in the context of OSCE and for the EU as a whole.
The Balkan area, I visited both Albania and Bosnia-Herzegovina in October and discussed with United Nations, the OSCE and EU representatives on the development onward. And here there is of course many issues to be discussed. I couldn't go in detail now in this short time, but I will go and visit as CIO again the whole area, because Western Balkan has got too little, I would say too little political priority. Here is also, of course, the issue of the EU coming membership. And you know that, no, you don't know, I don't think you know, but after us, it will be Poland who is CIO, and after Poland, it's the North Macedonia, who is a Western Balkan country. And on Monday, I had a bilateral with the new foreign minister and the deputy prime minister to discuss what we should do, both in relation to their chairpersonship, so they will be in the Troika from next year, and the EU perspective, which is, of course, very, very important. But it will take too long to go through each of the country. But I would say it's also important, and I will visit also as CIO.
So we have another question from our friends watching us online. Zebulon is asking about the future of the Open Skies Treaty, which you referenced in your opening remarks. Is it too late? What can be done to save the treaty now that both the US in the Trump era, as well as more recently the Russians, are basically trying to exit the treaty? Is there a way to save the treaty at this point?
It's not too late. Absolutely not. Just to say first, the Open Sky Treaty is not formally an OSCE treaty, but it's very close to OSCE. It's 33 of the participating 57 states who has signed it. And the United States decided to leave the OSCE treaty roughly half a year ago because they didn't think that Russia were in compliance with the agreement. And then the Russian decided 2 weeks ago that they will start a process to leave also the Open Sky Treaty. And we play as a very great value to the OSCE treaty because it is a confidence and security building measure where the different countries can, well, more or less photograph each other's areas. And then by then see that there is no military buildup where it shouldn't be, and that there is no exercise where it shouldn't be, and so on. So it is important. And now I really hope that in this line of joining START, talking positively about the JCPOA, that the new Biden administration would decide that they think it's important to take part in this confidence building measure with the 33 states. And by that also convincing Russia to stop them from leaving in the process that they formally has started. And then we need to review and modernize both Open Sky Treaty and also the so-called Vienna document, which is the other very important military confidence building measure in OSCE. So no, it's not hopeless, and I really, really think that here is a possibility for a good thing to do.
Terrific. Well, if I can just detain you for one more moment, I have one more question. And in light of your remarkable leadership in promoting Sweden's vision of a feminist foreign policy, it comes from Natalia, who asks, you've talked a lot about gender equality as a key priority. What actions as CIO do you plan to take to promote the OSCE's Women, Peace, and security agenda.
Well, thank you very much. Well, here we will try to have a mainstreaming of gender equality in all parts of the OSCE. We want to move the agenda for women, peace and security and the United Nations Security Resolution 1325 forward. For example, when all the military advisors come to Sweden, I have planned that we should go to the Nordic Gender Academies, I think it's called. It's NATO certified, so they should be able to see firsthand on how to react in different situations, kind of playing a game. Which I know that militaries loves to do when they exercise, and it's in all different dimensions where we would put in the issue of women, peace and security. You know, OSCE has 3 dimensions. It's the military dimension, it's the economic and environmental dimension, and it's the human rights and democracy dimension. And here we have concrete proposals for each of them. As one example, in the second dimension, we will work with economic empowerment of women. And the reason is that for women to take part in peace treaties, they need also to have an economic empowerment, so they have the time and the possibility to take part. We know by a lot of research that if women take part in peace agreements, they are more sustainable. And one reason for that is that women had other contact points in society than men has, meaning that they are bearers of peace treaty in another way than men are. We also have the women mediation network. We started in Sweden and then the Nordic countries. Now we have women peace mediators networks in nearly all continents. And of course, we also would like to use that in the field missions and the conflicts in OSCE. So I think that this is something that is very, very positive. I'm so sorry that there has been a backlash when it comes to gender issues, and both in EU, in United Nations, and in the OSCE. At the Tirana ministerial conflict, we had 2 proposals for ministerial resolutions on gender. I thought it was totally uncontroversial. One was about making 1325 more implemented in OSCE, and the other was to make the OSCE panels more gender, with more gender parity, and both were vetoed. I mean, I just cannot believe that they were vetoed. So here is a lot to do, and of course, some countries think that this is not important, and I really disagree. I think this is very, very important. So this will be a priority for me as CIO.
It's delightful to hear that, Minister Linda. We're really grateful to you for staying a little bit over time today and for spending time with us and the audience that's watching us online. We wish you all the best in your future incarnation or your current incarnation as CIO. Godspeed to Moscow, and we're just delighted to witness the revival of U.S.-Swedish relations as well. So, and your leadership is crucial to all of these dimensions. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.